Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
And welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. So if there's stuff going on in your life, if there's a problem with your health, maybe there's some challenges going on in your relationship space, or you hate your job and you're looking to move on to something else, give me a call. We can set up a time for a one-on-one consultation by phone or by Skype. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. If you haven't gotten a copy of my new book, E.T. Chronicles, it's still available on Amazon.com, waiting for you, or actually at the bookstore near you, or my new movie, Icon, Deconstructing the Archetypes of Our Ancient. That obviously is still available on Amazon as a digital download, only $1.99. It's a bargain. I would say I would autograph it for you and send it to you, but it doesn't work that way. I don't know why. Anyway, we're going to have a great show tonight. We have a good friend of Just Energy Radio. We have Mike Bara coming on tonight talking to us about ancient aliens on Mars 2. I don't know. I guess we're going to find out about that. But let me tell you a little bit about Mike. Mike Bara is a New York Times bestselling author, lecturer, and TV personality. He began his writing career after spending more than 25 years as an engineering design consultant for a major aerospace companies, where he is a card-carrying member of the military-industrial complex. Tonight, he'll be building on his case made in Ancient Aliens on Mars 1, and using data acquired from sophisticated new scientific instruments like the Mars Odyssey Themis infrared imager. Mike is going to show us how regions of the Cydonia overlays a vast underground city filled with enormous structures and devices that still may be operating. Wow. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Mike Bara. Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm good, Rita. How are you? Wow, that's an old bio. That's like last year's book. You know, we can talk about it all you want, but I'm almost done with this year's book. So, you know, we're getting. I'm just rolling. I got so many things going. I can't remember what I'm talking about from moment to moment.
Well, I think the last time you were on the show, we were talking about Ancient Aliens on Mars 1, and the new book was coming out like the next week. It was like boom, boom. So because you were busy with your TV show and you didn't have time to come here and hang out with us.
Yeah.
So, well, but I got you now, and I'm waiting for the new book because you have another new book.
I wish more women would say that about me. I've got you now.
Why does Mike, I got you now.
Yeah. February, I'm supposed to be very attractive this month, according to my numerology. So I got my eyes open for the next ex-Mrs. Bara that's going to come along.
I can't remember what that post you had on Facebook was about
Yeah.
You and your friend hanging out with your ex-wives, or I don't remember. It was funny.
Yeah, well, no, I have a friend named Francie Runmark. Actually, her name is Jill St. James. That's her pen name, and she's an amazing numerologist, and she's got me tagged for February being a great month for me to meet my next mate. So I kind of twisted it around into, meeting my next ex-wife is, I just got to get the house and the car that I'm going to give you after we break up all bought, and then we can go forward.
We'll have to compare wars. We'll have to compare notes, because I'll give a presentation and I'll be saying, well, da 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 da, and tell this story, but it'll be about an ex, and it's like, oh, but not the one I just told you about. It was a different one. A different
ex, yes.
It's like I've been married way too many times. It's just not even funny.
Well, for me, it's just the once. But I'm looking forward to number 2. Isn't number 2 where I pick the really, really gorgeous young girl and marry her, and then that turns into a complete disaster? Isn't that the one you always talk about with the third wife who's the perfect one and age appropriate? I don't know. I'm ready to get going now.
I don't know. I haven't really been attracted to some, young, sweet thing, just not my speed.
Well, really, it's interesting, because that's interesting you would say that, because I kind of I've thought this through a bit. I mean, over the last, I've been divorced, 10 years now. And I've met a lot of girls, and some of them I was serious with, and I had a couple of fairly serious relationships, and the third one that I really wanted to be serious, that kind of was sometimes. And it was one of these things where I just thought, what do I want out of the next girl, the one that I really want to, I realized I wanted to get married again. That was one of the gifts I got from one of the relationships that didn't work out. And I thought, what I really want is sweet. I don't care if the next girl is as dumb as a post, as long as she's sweet, because my last wife was super smart and vicious.
But as Ron White says,
go the other way.
But as Ron White says, you can't fix stupid.
Yeah. But you don't have to. I mean, it's like, I'm looking, again, intelligence is an admirable quality in a man or a woman, but it's not a requirement for me. I want a sweet girl this time. So that's what I'm looking for.
Then you need to move to Texas. Maybe even Louisiana or Arkansas. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well, unfortunately, it appears I'm moving towards L.A. instead. So I guess that's closer to Texas than Seattle, but they're not a whole lot, not a large supply of sweet ones in L.A., I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Mike, let's talk about because you have Ancient Aliens on Mars, and then you have Ancient Aliens on Mars Dose.
Yeah.
Do. LL, whatever.
Yeah.
And I know we talked about a whole bunch of different things.
Don't forget Ancient Aliens on the Moon. Don't forget The Choice, and don't forget Dark Mission, and the soon-to-be-released Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies. That's coming along too.
I know. I'm waiting for that one. It was supposed to be released this month, but then they told me, no, it's not. And I said, okay.
Yeah, it's because the author has to finish it, and he's about a week away from doing that. But now my life's about to be turned upside down, so I don't know when it's going to be finished. Hopefully, the end of the month. So anyway. Yes, we were going to talk about Ancient Aliens on Mars too, right?
That's right. But let's start here. We're going to kind of backtrack on some information we covered in the last interview, just kind of general information. But because the whole concept is that there were extraterrestrials on Mars at some point in time. So what led you to believe that there was once intelligent life, aka a civilization, on Mars?
Well, for me, it's simply looking at all the pictures of the stuff that they left behind. I mean, the monuments, the pyramids, the landing strips, the machinery, the equipment, all the stuff that you can see from orbit as well as down on the ground. by the various rovers that have been traveling over Mars now for the better part of 10 years, and just taking all kinds of pictures of these things. I mean, really, if my background is mechanical engineering, and that's not architecture, but I know structure when I see it. And, I've just looked at many of these things on Mars that were first brought up in the 1970s as possibly being artificial. And the more you study them, the more you analyze them, the more you dig into them, the more clear it becomes, at least to my mind, that we're talking about artificial structures and not natural formations. And, it's one of these things where you've got that long range sort of support. You got all these different images of Mars that show different things that, for a variety of reasons that we can talk about over the course of the next couple hours, verify that they're artificial. And then, you have these rovers landing in different spots on Mars, but also driving around and taking images of all kinds of things that, to my eye, are equipment, mechanical devices. I mean, we found what look like cameras, what look like computer projectors, computer circuit boards that have been eroded, air conditioners, wrenches, clamps, gears, what looks like, metal cased objects with flywheel engine type intakes inside of them, just everything you can imagine from a mechanical engineering standpoint. Anything that you might see on an airplane or in the factory that built it, you can find on Mars, and you can find in these various rover pictures, whether it's Pathfinder, Spirit, Opportunity, or even now Curiosity. They're just all over the place. And so you've got multiple levels of confirmation. And just after 15, 20 years of looking at all this stuff very closely, I just, for me, it's a foregone conclusion that we're looking at extraterrestrial architecture.
Well, and it sounds like these images are up close and personal. It's not like they are orbiting from space and taking high definition photos, but they're actually some of them are. I mean, that's one of the things I covered in Ancient Aliens on Mars was the orbital images of objects like the face on Mars, the D&M pyramid, which is a five-sided pentagonal pyramid on Mars that actually has two separate axes of symmetry, which means that it's symmetrical about two different center lines. And, again, people try to claim this is a wind-eroded object, which is ridiculous because if it was wind-eroded, it would be rounded. It would not be angular like this. And it's in complete isolation, and you cannot find any naturally occurring pyramidal mountains on Earth or anywhere else that are in isolation and not part of a mountain range. And, I look at stuff like that, and, we can look at that from space, and we can look at the details. And then when we get deeply into the face on Mars, if you actually look at the areas that have been eroded away by wind, you can see room-sized cellular-type structures. There's an area on the face that's in the second Mars book, Ancient Aliens on Mars 2, where it's literally the size of a sports arena, and you can see that the roof has collapsed inside, and the support structure, all the beams and girders and things that support it, go around this thing at a 90-degree angle, kind of a square. They're all sticking up. Now, in other words, the roof is caved in, and you see all the support struts still sticking up. And it looks exactly like sports arenas in the U.S. that have had their roofs collapsed. And it's the same size, but it's actually on this gigantic monument, the face on Mars, and it's shown in the high-resolution Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter images, which, by the way, people have accused me of never talking about or never showing the high-resolution images of the face, and that's just absolute nonsense. There's all kinds of stuff about them in my books, both Mars books, so that's just a bunch of BS. And then, you do have the supporting ground truth that the rovers give us, which is, again, just the kind of stuff that you would expect to find in a junkyard if the planet Mars was, in fact, what myself and other people allege it is, which is that it's a junkyard. You talked about this sports arena kind of complex. And one of the questions that I had for you is based on the size. I mean, it's sounding like, let me back up. It's sounding like we can identify the relative size of these different structures or monuments that you are talking about or will be talking about tonight. Can you identify or figure out if there were inhabitants that were occupying these structures, how big they would be?
They were roughly the same size as us. Before we do this, so let's go a little bit deeper into this and let people know that you can go to my blog. It's mikebara.blogspot.com, or just search Mike Bara on Google. It's the first thing that comes up, and it's Bara. And if you go to my blog, mikebara.blogspot.com, and click on the Photos tab, there's a link on the next page that says all the images from my books, Ancient Aliens on the Moon and Mars, are available on my Picasa web album. So if you just click on that Picasa web album link, it'll take you right to a page where you can look at all these different things that we're talking about, from both Ancient Aliens on Mars, Ancient Aliens on Mars 2, and then also Ancient Aliens on the Moon. So they're all right in there, and we can go look at them. So you know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So I just wanted to let that out. So, yeah, you know the distance of the orbiter, so you kind of have a per pixel scale, and then from that you can deduce about roughly how big these things are. The face itself is really an enormous structure. It's about 1.5 miles long by a little over 1 mile wide. It's quite enormous. It goes up very, very high into the sky. The tip of the nose is the highest point on the face on Mars, and it has an eye socket that looks like a human eye socket. It has a brow ridge. It has a nose. It has what looks like a mouth that goes through. It has what appear to be nostrils. And then when you get into the absolute depth of it, you get into this really super high resolution detail. You see these rooms and these buildings, and they are built at roughly a human scale. So, I've always asked myself, why would an alien species that didn't look like us build a human-looking face on Mars? And the answer is they wouldn't. And what I suspect is that this is extraterrestrial rather than alien. And the context of that, to me, means that alien means not really genetically related to us, whereas extraterrestrial to me means pretty much like us, and that we're kind of an offshoot of them. So they're extraterrestrial as opposed to alien.
Well, that's a really interesting separation. That's kind of like God with a big G and God with a little g. They're aliens, and they're just extraterrestrials.
Right, which I use that all the time. I mean, I use the God with a small g as opposed to God with a big G. And unfortunately, what most people don't appreciate, I think, is that mostly the God in the Bible that's talked about most of the time is actually a God with a small g, not God with a big G. He's only really in Genesis. So that's one of the interesting
really
things.
There either.
Yeah, well, he's there about 14 times, I think, in Genesis. If I did research for that for my second book, The Choice, and that's what my next book, Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies, is about, is the gods with a small g, and what were they doing here, and why were they doing it.
Well, that ought to be some interesting conversation.
It should be. It should be. I hope it is.
When talking about the face on Mars, I feel like I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but we're talking about size. If we were to compare the size of the face on Mars and compare it to the pyramids in Egypt.
Oh, hundreds, like 100 times bigger. I mean, the pyramids in Egypt are about the biggest one, the Great Pyramid, is about 800 feet tall. If you put that next to the face on Mars, it would be a little bitty speck in many of these images. It's really not of significant size at all by comparison.
So it sounds like this face, regardless of where you are, is something that you would be able to see from space.
Yeah, it was designed to be seen from orbit, as I think was the entire complex of objects around it. Remember, the face is in an area called Cydonia on Mars, which has not only the face, but it has an area called the City, which is a bunch of other isolated pyramidal-looking structures. And there's the D&M pyramid that we talked about earlier, the 5-sided pyramid which has 2 different axes of symmetry. All that stuff is around the face. And to me, that's always encouraged or supported the idea that it was an artificial structure. If it was just sitting there by itself, there really wouldn't be a whole lot to support the idea that it was artificial. But the fact that it's surrounded by all kinds of other apparently artificial looking structures, and according to the thermal infrared data that we got from NASA at one point, there appears to be an entire city underneath the Cydonia plain. All of that sort of reinforces in a consistent way the fact that the face is artificial.
What I find interesting is that we have, kind of a parallel with the lines of Nazca, where it appears that they were designed to be seen from the air or space, or it is a feature that can be seen from orbit, just like the face on Mars.
Yeah, although, it's a little different than Nazca in the sense that Nazca has these drawn out figures, these figures that have clearly been drawn in the sand. And, there are people that I talked about in Ancient Aliens on Mars too. There are people that do believe there's stuff like that on Mars, that there is a drawing of Nefertiti, for instance, that there's drawings of various birds and parrots and things like that. And, I kind of make the argument that I'd be more impressed by that if they were all together the way they are on Nazca. But the fact is that they're all spread out on a wide area. They're all over the place on Mars in different pictures. And I think that people are kind of lightening and darkening certain areas to make it look more like what they want it to look like than what it really is. In a lot of cases, I think that they're not really pictograms the way the Nazca lines are. So to me, it's a little different. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that it's really it's not valuable to actually look for stuff like that or consider that possibility, because one of the things that I do cover in Ancient Aliens on Mars 2 is the fact that these guys that are looking at this stuff and are writing about it, they've looked at dolphins and seahorses and Nefertiti and all this stuff. When you actually looked at study an area that they're calling the parrot, or what they think is a parrot, just north of that, is a city complex that was discovered by some other researchers whose name escapes me, and I apologize. But as I begin to study the so-called parrot image and looked at this city area, what I found was, I think, probably the most extraordinarily, obviously artificial city-like landscape that I've ever found on Mars. That is, I think I can make the strongest argument out of any of them that it's absolutely artificial. And it's just phenomenal what you see when you dig into that. So it kind of led me into studying this parrot city area, and really led to an amazing part of the book where I really go through a lot of the discovery process of this area, these sets of structures, make comparisons to Redondo, Hermosa beaches in Los Angeles and things like that, and really came away from it just absolutely with my jaw dropping at what I found. So, there is value in looking at that, although I don't necessarily agree with their interpretations of some of the objects that they point out.
Well, and I think with many things, we look at it, instead of just describing what we see, we try to interpret it and make it fit in our framework. But it's the same as our ancestors. They saw the lights in the sky and the chariots of the gods and tried to describe them best they could based on the information and technology they had of the day as well.
Right.
So what we call a PC board that's laying on the Martian landscape, might have been, I don't know what an ancient would have called it, a piece of wood.
Yeah, they wouldn't, it's interesting because one of the things in the new book in Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies that I've been doing is I've been going back and reading a lot of Zecharia Sitchin's books and going through his research. And, they have sky chariots and they have celestial chariots and they have, what do they call them? Sky vehicles, and basically all these different things that when you read them, they clearly are descriptions of rocket ships, aircraft, helicopters, even tanks. There's just descriptions of different objects that you clearly can say, well, that's an ancient, Sumerian who had a fairly primitive way of looking at things, trying to describe something he doesn't really understand, or trying to describe a technology that he doesn't really understand. So, yeah, I would agree with you on that point.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's people still there?
Well, it's interesting. I'm looking at some of the images on my web album. I'm looking at this area that I call the industrial complex in Parrot City, and it looks like a processing plant of some kind for processing ore or something. And there's roads and bridges and houses and bunkers and what looks like a factory with tubes and different instruments and things on it, and you know, vents, and I'm looking at this, and it's in a state of disrepair, but it's not horrifically so. In other words, it's not really, really old stuff. It's not desperately old. It might be only a few thousand or a few 100,000 years old. And it's quite extraordinary to me when I look at this, that it does look abandoned, but it doesn't look like it's been abandoned for very long. So it's hard for me to argue that there's nothing, you know, in operation there anymore. Now, when you look at the thermal infrared images of the Cydonia region, right around the face and the D&M pyramid, and the stuff that we found that has to be under the ground there, if they're telling the truth about the capabilities of the thermal infrared camera on the Mars Odyssey spacecraft that took those images, then the only way we could be seeing that much reflectance and that much heat feedback to the camera is if, you know, the lights are still on down there. Now, that doesn't mean there's anybody there, but whoever was there apparently left and didn't turn off the lights, because it looks like there's still stuff going on there.
And can you backtrack and explain what a thermal imaging camera would take a picture of? You know, like what is it collecting? What kind of data is it collecting to put into a visual image?
Basically, heat signatures is what it's picking up. It's picking up heat signatures. And you know, on a place like Mars, which is extremely cold at night, what you get is different materials retain heat differently. Metals retain heat differently than stone does. Stone does a better job of retaining heat. So you can make some deductions on what stuff is made of by the amount of heat you would expect them to have retained from the daytime. I mean, most people don't know that the temperature on Mars in the day can get up to about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you were to lay on your back with a little oxygen mask, you know, on Mars, there you could very comfortably do that. You could crawl around, you could sit there, you could do various things. You wouldn't necessarily want to stand up, because about five or 6 feet above the surface of Mars, it gets a whole lot colder. But within that very narrow biosphere, it's pretty warm. So there is heat there that can be retained by this stuff. And a thermal infrared imager like the Mars Odyssey Themis instrument can do that. And this is why back in the early 2000s, you know, this was a really big deal for us. We really wanted to get our hands on a nighttime thermal infrared image of Cydonia, which we never really did. I mean, all they ever really released was a really terrible JPEG, very poor quality image that they claimed was nighttime, and which may or may not have been an actual nighttime image. But we did get a daytime thermal infrared image, and or series of images, a series of image strips. There were multiple problems with that, first of which was that NASA played a little bit of a game with us, and that they gave us the images, and they convinced a guy named Keith Laney, who was doing the thermal infrared imaging processing for us, to go download their data set. And then as soon as he did, they switched it with another data set, which had a bunch of noise induced into it, the whole sole purpose of which was that if we did work on this image and found stuff there, which of course we did, we found the city under the ice, under the ground at Cydonia, then anybody who tried to repeat our work with the same data set from the same web page would download a different image which had all that stuff basically erased, and they wouldn't be able to repeat it, and we would look like liars or fools. So fortunately, we caught them at this little bit of skullduggery before we ever released any images, but it was one of those really interesting episodes that convinces me that, you know, me and the other independent researchers are on the right track as far as Mars is concerned. Now, to actually answer your question, it takes pictures of heat and heat retention, and you know, and you can tell a little bit about composition from that, and you can tell a lot about what's underneath the surface, but you shouldn't be able to see very deeply down into the surface. And in these images, it seems like you can. So what I'm wondering is if the camera isn't a whole lot better than they've ever let us really see in the public images that have been released, and if NASA doesn't know a whole lot more about what's under the ground on Mars than they've ever told us. And if they do, then I would say that, you know, that's logically what we're seeing when we look at these images.
Based on solar radiation, could the ground, or if there was, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here a second, or any kind of metal or I don't know, some kind of rock that could get hot. When it transitions into the evening, could you get readings off of it that would show up on a thermal image?
Yeah, you could, and that's kind of why we wanted a nighttime thermal infrared image of Cydonia, because that would give us, we thought a really crystal clear picture because of the contrast from the heat versus the extreme cold of night. So you would see much more clearly what was underneath the surface. And unfortunately, we never really got a good image of that. And we suspect, and when I say we, I mean myself and Richard C. Hoagland and some other people that were involved. What I think that we see in those images is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's there. I mean, I'm sure that there's infinitely superior images that NASA has stuck in the archives that we're never going to get to see.
Well, isn't that kind of what happens all the time? I mean, I recall when we talked about ancient aliens on the moon, that was a big issue, that when people went and pulled up the photos of the moon, that there were parts that were smudged at, like photoshopped and smudged out, and they did all kinds of weird stuff so that you couldn't really get a clear image.
Yeah, they do that, and what I think it is that they're never going to give you the full smoking gun. They give you enough, I think, to support your case and move it forward, but they never give you enough to really let you have the smoking gun. And that's just part and parcel to the way NASA has always operated. And I don't know what the reasons are for that beyond the obvious, I think, religious stuff that we talked about in Dark Mission, and that I'm going to be talking about in the Secret Societies book. But it's something that's been kind of a pattern that's ongoing, but stuff seems to slip through the cracks. And also, I think that in terms of the religious aspect of this, I think that they do have to give us the information, but it's kind of like a secret society in a sense that you have to know the right question to ask. If you don't ask the right question, they're not going to give you the answer. So, it's weird because I think that they must be doing it in such a way that they're saying, they're like setting it up so that when they have to answer to somebody, and I have no idea who that is, although it could be the Anunnaki, when they come back, it's like, well, we gave them all the information, they just ignored it. That's what I feel like NASA is doing, is pretending, putting the information out there, but only if you're really paying attention do you get it. And only if you can figure it out do you really understand what they're trying to say and what they're trying to do.
Okay, if you can see through all that. I guess
that's the way secret societies operate, and unfortunately NASA is nothing if not a secret society. It's one of the most secretive organizations in the government, which is saying something for this current government.
In a good way or in a bad way?
Well, in a bad way. This is the most...
I just can't really see NASA being the most secretive organization. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, but they have to be, because they're the ones that are taking pictures of things that would shatter the world's vision of itself. And so they very much have to be very secretive. And they are a compartmentalized Defense Department adjunct. They're not an independent science agency. People have that kind of mistaken belief as well. NASA is a Defense Department agency. So if military security and military secrecy isn't the highest level of secrecy that we have in our government, I don't know what is, and NASA's a part of that.
Good point. I guess something that makes me wonder is why go to Mars? Why send the rovers? To me, okay, it seems like we lost our interest in the moon. And, one of the prevailing theories is because they found stuff on the moon and they just didn't want to go there anymore because they didn't want to have to deal with it, or they were warned not to go there. I don't know, this whole big reason. But why Mars? Why is there this interest in Mars?
Well, I think it's multi-leveled. One of the levels of it is that, Mars is named for Marduk, who was an ancient Anunnaki god with a small g, who apparently ruled over, Babylon, and also went to ancient Egypt a long time ago. So it's an area of symbolic interest. And also the fact that, can you hear that? Do I have to go shut this dog up?
For everyone that's listening, that's Barkley.
He just started up like right when I started talking, and I really want to scream and tell him to shut the hell up. He's a little bit wired. He's a little overly wired. He's about 2 feet long, but he thinks he's a much bigger dog. Hang on a second, okay? Can you just entertain the crowd for a little bit?
I'll entertain him. I think that maybe Barkley needs to hang out with my chupacabra Bidsy. Maybe Barkley needs a tinfoil hat.
Oh, wait a minute. I think he's calming down. I'd love to strangle him right now, but...
See, really. I usually just pick Bitsy up and put her in my lap, or she used to sit on my desk.
That's not going to happen with Barkley. He's just going to keep doing that. So anyway, the other aspect of it is that, according to the Anunnaki writings, the Sumerian tablets that Sitchin has translated, Mars was a way station. So Mars was a place where the Anunnaki came and set up a base and lived and flourished. And, very interestingly, in this Secret Societies book, what's really interesting is that Mars at that time, according to the Anunnaki, was a habitable world. It was a little less hospitable than the Earth, but it had running water. It had, it had everything that they needed to actually set up a base there. It had breathable oxygen, but it wasn't, and this was only 400,000 years ago. It wasn't until some bad stuff happened, where Nibiru made a pass very close to the asteroid belt and sent a bunch of rocks, in towards the Earth and created the basically the Great Deluge and devastated Mars, that it really became an inhospitable place. So I think what you're looking at is leftover Anunnaki technology. And the premise that I've always been operating from is that that the Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, were here, that they did live, and that they did create a lot of the stuff that we see on the surface of Mars. In fact, one of the stories that came through in one of the translations was that they buried one of the Anunnaki kings, Alalu, who had rebelled against Anu, who was the king of the king of Nibiru and the god king of the Anunnaki, and that he ended up, after basically 2 or 3 rebellions, he ended up being vanquished or banished to Mars, where he died, and that in fact the face on Mars was a tribute to him as an Anunnaki king who had passed away there, that it's a tomb, and that his body's actually inside that structure. So, I think the fascination with Mars is because of the fact that there is a lot of stuff there, and it's probably fairly well preserved, and we're sending different probes to go find it. So, that's, to me, that's the main reason why Mars is such a fascinating place, because it's also like a giant refrigerator. It's so cold and everything that everything's pretty well preserved. So it makes it an ideal target if your purpose of existence, if the real reason of your existence, if you're NASA, is to actually retrieve, the artifacts and the technology of the gods, then I think that Mars would be an ideal place to do that.
So do you think that they are looking to find technology to get it and then back engineer it?
Yeah, that's one possibility, although I suspect that they didn't have much luck with what they brought back from the moon, so that could have been a big problem. And, do we take a break at any point in the show, Rita? Because I really...
Yeah, hang on. Hey, Joe, can we go to a quick break? We're going to go to a quick break, okay, Joe?
Let's take a dog break here, and I'll go deal with my problem, all right?
All right. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Mike Bara about his book, Ancient Aliens on Mars 2. We're going to take a little puppy break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
Are you looking for a cure for boredom? Never worry. IRN's new interactive website introduces a number of ways to pass time while you listen to your favorite show. Choose anything from the IRN chat lounge, the game lounge, video lounge, or the mood lounge. These fun, exciting features let you chat in real time with fellow listeners, view live skywatches, play daily posted online games, or pick a show based on topic. The choices are endless. Use your time wisely, keeping it all on IRN.
Who were the gods of antiquity? They've been described as the forces of nature, levels of consciousness, and aspects of our psyche. Stories that depict their incredible weapons, their flying machines, and their amazing adventures are characterized as being the product of our ancestors' fanciful imaginations. But what if the tales of the gods are true? Did the writers, chroniclers, and scribes of our distant past actually document a realistic view of our origin? My latest book, Man-Made: The Chronicles of Our Extra-Terrestrial Gods, looks at our most ancient legends. Learn of the torrid romances, elaborate plots, violent scandals, and conspiracies that played out in antiquity. Find out the role the gods played in the life and culture we have today. If you want to find out the truth of who we are and where we come from, order your copy of Man-Made today. For more information, go to www.manmadethechronicles.com. That's www.manmadethechronicles.com.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Move past the crossroads in your life and discover alternative solutions to your deepest concerns at soulhealer.com. So whether it's a physical problem, an emotional issue, a question about work, or troubles in your relationships, naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise can help you. Bring peace, harmony, and health back into your life. Schedule a session today. Visit soulhealer.com right away and live the life you've been dreaming of.
You didn't forget what's coming up tonight, did you? Hi, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Never miss that interview you were looking forward to or the show on your favorite topic. Follow IRN on Twitter, I_R_N, and get reminders about the evening's live shows as well as fun and important updates throughout the week. That's I_R_N, and never miss a great show again.
We only have a couple of seconds before we have to get back to the show, and I want to tell you how you can jumpstart your intuition today. Using my free 50-page introductory guide filled with simple, revolutionary, and proven techniques, you can ignite your intuition and tap into your inner wisdom, all from the comfort of your own home. The Institute of Applied Energetics is the leader in online home study instruction for those interested in becoming a certified medical intuitive, intuitive counselor, or energy medicine practitioner. Now is the time to transform your life and take it to a completely new level. Discover who you are and how you work. Open the door to the world of intuition, health, and healing. You can jumpstart your intuition right away by going to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and downloading our free guide. Get the opportunity of a lifetime and live the life you deserve. Download your free Jumpstart Your Intuition guide today at www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and begin living a life filled with passion and purpose.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second part of the show. Anyway, we're here talking to Mike Bara about his book, Ancient Aliens on Mars 2. His webpage is mikebara.blogspot.com. Mike, before we took our Barkley break, Barkley
and
break.
no, I did not strangle Barkley. I just fed him and put him in another room where hopefully he'll be a bit quieter.
In the little comfy bed spot. Yeah.
Yes.
What we were talking about, why they're actually going to Mars and doing all of this research there, because it seems like there's just so much more interest on Mars than there was on the moon. I don't recall them sending so many rovers to the moon either.
Well, no, they didn't, but we didn't really have the technology back in the 60s. I mean, we did send 12 men to the moon, which is a whole different thing. And really, I guess the rovers back then would be the car, the lunar rover, which was called a rover, that we sent there that allowed them, not the lunar, that allowed them to basically drive on the surface. So we examined the moon in fairly, significant detail, and we did it because we were, looking for specific things to bring back. I think proof of the ancient alien presence on the lunar surface. And I wouldn't say that we got done with it. I just think that most of what we found there was probably in real ruins, a really significant amount of decay because of the fact that it's so exposed there to, meteors and things, in spite of the meteor shield that's may or may not still be protecting the planet to some extent. Everything there was really beat up. And I suspect that Mars has been more of the focus because there's probably a better chance of finding stuff that's really well preserved there.
Ah, good point. If you were to guess, would you say that the ages of what they're finding on the moon and on Mars are in relative close age proximity, or do you think that there's a time difference between the two?
Well, I don't have a clue, but I will say that the stuff on the moon seems honestly a lot older than the stuff on Mars. And I think that again, the Anunnaki tablets, the Sumerian tablets, do say essentially that the Anunnaki didn't find the moon very hospitable, and they didn't spend much time there. And what that means then is that most of the stuff that is there is from some prior habitation of the moon, and who even knows who those people were that constructed all that stuff that's on the moon. So I suspect that there is a big age difference, but I couldn't prove it to save my life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but that's a good observation. Okay, so we have a question from the chat room, and this is from Neutron, and he wants to know, have you had a chance to examine a very recent picture of Mars caught by astronomers that display a tall, and it says mile-high chimney tower plume on the planet?
Yeah, I've seen a picture of this plume that was actually discovered by amateur astronomers they take pictures that were taking pictures of Mars, and I have seen that, and it looks to me there's only really two things that it could be, because the atmosphere is definitely pumped up there, it's bulging out, and either you've got some kind of volcanic activity, which seems unlikely because the planet is considered essentially volcanically dead, although that may be wrong. Or an asteroid or comet struck the planet and sent up a big, huge plume of dust. So either way, it's extremely interesting. The third and the most remote possibility is that somebody turned on the atmospheric repressurization machine and they're starting to pump out oxygen into the atmosphere or something. But I hate to say that's a possibility, but I think the most likely possibilities are either that we had a volcano belt something out, which would be unusual, or we actually had something strike the planet itself, which may not be bad news for the rest of us, because it may mean that we're moving into an area of space where there's a lot more debris coming our way.
The people that lived on Mars, do you think they lived on the surface, or do you think they were primarily living underground?
Well, I think it's both, because there's stuff left over where clearly they were living on the surface and it was inhabited. There was definitely people there. The face on Mars, all these things are above ground. And again, the Sumerian tablets, the stories tell us that Mars was hospitable when they first got there, that there was atmospheric pressure, running water. And so they would logically have lived above the ground. But there's other sources and other stories that say things like, that they had to move underground after there was a war in the skies. So it's kind of, to me, a question that has two answers, which is that yes and yes, they lived above ground and they lived underground. It's just a question of which is the later epoch. I would assume that the later stuff is the underground stuff, because they probably had to move underground when environmental conditions really begin to deteriorate.
Do you think they're still there underground? Or at least somebody still there underground?
Well, I don't know. I don't have any evidence of that, but like I said, the lights are on, so it seems like somebody could be there if they wanted to be.
I mean, I kind of feel like when they've sent the probes up there and sent different things, and when the second one blew out of the sky, it just made me go, huh? Well, maybe they just don't want us landing on the moon. That was my knee-jerk reaction to it. And I don't know. I'm kind of sticking with it.
On the moon?
On the moon, not on the moon. On Mars, excuse me, on Mars.
Well, there's been a number of probes that have been lost on Mars. There's one called Beagle 2 that the British lost, the Europeans lost about 10 years ago, which they recently found, and it's just sitting there and appears to be in full operating condition, but it's just sitting there and it never transmitted anything back. And it looks like maybe the panels, the solar panels didn't deploy properly, which, again, is a good reason not to send something with solar energy as a source of power up to Mars. Let's give those things little nuclear reactors and they'll operate for 20 years. So there are things that can happen. I think of all the different probes that have been lost, the most mysterious one is the Mars Observer probe, and I talk about that in Ancient Aliens on Mars 1. And it was a really strange case because it was a camera that was good enough to have taken pictures of Cydonia and the face on Mars and kind of ended the debate about whether it was artificial or not. And right after the head of the Mars Observer Project, Bevan French, lost a debate on Good Morning America to my co-author on Dark Mission, Richard C. Hoagland. I mean, lost it epically, got totally picked apart by Hoagland. 3 minutes after that, they announced that they had lost Mars Observer. And in fact, they had actually lost contact with it 14 hours before. Now, I don't know why NASA would put a guy on national TV to debate the Cydonia and the face on Mars, and talk about the Mars Observer probe when they already knew that it was missing, and not mention it. And the only thing that I can make an obvious conclusion about is that they wanted to see if he could beat Hoagland in the debate. He got absolutely plastered by the Hoagie, and they then decided to take it dark. And, it would give them an opportunity to have taken really good pictures of Cydonia and the face and other areas of Mars that they were suspicious might be artificial, and do that all in secret for years, and then go back in 1998 and, put up essentially the Mars Global Surveyor, which was the replacement, using the same equipment, and know exactly how to take pictures of the thing to make it look as bad as possible, which is what they ultimately did. So, to me, this is just the kind of thing I've been dealing with for the better part of 20 years now, in dealing with NASA.
Lies. It's all lies.
Yeah, at least some of it is.
What I find interesting, I never knew that other countries were sending probes to Mars as well. So this is the first I've heard that there was a British.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, who else is sending probes up there?
The European Space Agency has sent some really good probes. They sent the Mars Express to the planet Mars, and they took the first color images of Cydonia and the face on Mars. And they've really been great because they had a stereo camera which took two images at roughly the same time, and you could then take those two images and do 3D projections, create 3D models in the computer of that stuff. So we got 3D and color out of Mars Express, even though the spatial resolution was technically only about 14 meters per pixel compared to, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter can get below 2 meters per pixel or something in ideal conditions. They're great pictures. And the thing that they did that was different is NASA kept taking pictures of a face and saying it was completely natural, but every time they did it, they would take it from a really odd angle, from below, from behind, from offset, so that the face appeared to be distorted, so that the eye sockets looked like they didn't line up when in fact they did, so it looked really fat and wide and not very symmetrical when in fact it really was. But the Europeans gave, I think, the most honest data, because they tried to get exactly centered over the face when they took their pictures, just as the Viking images had been taken back in 1976. And the result was that they're, in my opinion, probably the best data set that we have of the face on Mars. And what I've started doing more recently on Ancient Aliens on Mars 2, in that book, I started taking different images from different probes that all have different cameras, so they all view the information, the ground truth, differently, and I started layering them on top of each other. And the more that you combine these images together, the more obvious it becomes that this is an artificial structure that looks pretty much like a human face, except there is some damage to it. But pretty much you can tell, you can look at it and say, okay, a couple 100,000 years ago, this probably looked like, a Lalu. It probably looked like the Anunnaki king that it was apparently built for. So, it's interesting that we have to go to Europe to be able to get a really good image, really high quality data set of the face on Mars, because the NASA probes just can't seem to hit the target properly.
It's jittering. From these new images, my impression looking at that face is that there is this big mound of dirt sitting on top of some kind of a rock structure, whether it's, natural or artificial. Have they gotten any close-ups? And is what we're seeing actually the stone surface, or is there dirt or some kind of debris that sits over this internal skeleton, should I say?
Well, yeah, there's dirt and debris there, but we have got very good pictures of this stuff. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter has a great camera. It's taken very good black and white or grayscale images of the face. And when we see the eroded skin of the thing, underneath it, what we see, like I said, is these squared room-sized kind of cells all over. There's one area where you've got a wall. It's a very bright colored wall that runs, straight line, 90 degrees, straight line, 90 degrees. So you got like L shapes just until the cows come home, which is clearly some sort of structural wall. I mean, that's exactly how you would build a structural wall. And in fact, in the photos that I've talked about, the ones that are on my Picasso web album, I've got that showing, and I compare it to ancient Roman ruins in Britain, where you've got exactly the same kind of construction. So the reality is that, as you get these pictures and look deeper at them, what you see is that there's a lot of dust, there's a lot of debris, but there's also a lot of structure and underlying support that's getting exposed by the weather or whatever, for whatever reason it's becoming exposed over the ages.
Well, they have storms there, right? On Mars?
Yeah, they have windstorms and sandstorms. Although because the atmosphere is so thin, the wind has to blow really hard. But there is erosion there. There's just less erosion than there is on Earth. So, there could be any number of reasons why one side is more degraded than the other. But on the right side of the face that you would expect to be more degraded, that's where we see all this structural stuff sticking up through the dust and debris. And, the only way we're ever going to really know how it's constructed, what's really underneath it, is to actually go there and explore the thing. But it seems to be, for whatever reason, one of the areas that NASA just doesn't want to go to. So I'm upset by that. I don't like that. I would like to see us examine the face.
I think that's one of the ongoing comments of, this is the one area on Mars that if there is going to be signs of life, this would be the area, or this would be the most reasonable place to start.
Yeah.
And they don't. I mean, it seems like they intentionally avoid it like the plague.
Yeah, well, they do. And it's there is some rough ground at Cydonia. It wouldn't be the easiest landing to make, but I would definitely put a rover or two down there. And it's interesting from the standpoint of just geology, because even if you reject the notion that any of this stuff is artificial, which is really dumb, and I'd love to debate any JPL NASA guy on that any day of the week. even if you reject that message, though, what you find is that there is, if this is really geology, it's got to be the most geologically fascinating area of Mars, because it's on the shoreline, or at least on the shoreline of what they think was an ancient ocean. You've got all kinds of chaotic terrain there. You've got buried little pyramidal looking things. You've got these really interesting formations, these large mountains. And, I just don't know why you wouldn't look there, why it would be a great place to look for life. If there used to be an ocean there, then there might be microbial life under the ground that you could dig and search for life. So to me, it makes no sense that they keep going everywhere else except Cydonia to land one of these rovers. And, believe me, if I was president, we'd be going there. We'd be landing a rover there. And I think we'd put one on top of the place and one underneath, one right at the base of it, and drive around. It would be a really interesting exploration. But of course, the explorations are not honest. I mean, if you look at the rover images, they are by an order of magnitude worse than the ground pictures that we took back in 1976 with the first two Viking landers. I mean, if you look at their images of the surface of Mars, they're way better. Yeah, you would think, looking at the Pathfinder images from 1997, you would think that in the ensuing 20 years, NASA camera technology declined in quality by about a factor of 90. I mean, 90 out of 100. It's amazing how terrible the images are. And conveniently, all of the really interesting looking objects on the surface of Mars near the Pathfinder lander, objects that appear to be mechanical in nature, they always seem to be the ones that have the biggest data errors and stuff, and blockouts and wallpaper. It looks like there's even one structure it looks like a metal cased object. They just basically wallpapered right over it. So it's stunning to me how poor the quality cameras are on these probes. And of course the reality is
budget
they're
cuts.
Not that poor. Well, they're
budget
not that
cuts.
they're not that poor. They're really in good really are good in good condition. But it's like,
but I mean, that doesn't make any sense from a logical point of view. No. It doesn't make any sense. They're sending these things up at taxpayers' dollars to investigate and take pictures and, I don't know, do soil samples. I don't know what they're testing all up there.
Well, they haven't done soil samples since 1976, but yeah, not really.
Okay, well, whatever they're doing
life,
up
anyway.
there. Okay, so they're just driving around taking pictures. You would think they'd send a good camera. I mean, really.
Well, you would. And in fact, on some of the new rovers, they've got about 5 cameras. They've got nav cams, they've got has cams, they've got, mast cam. They've just got all kinds of stuff. They got cameras all over the things, and yet they still not seem to be able to take a good picture. They look like good pictures. You look at them and are like, wow, that looks like a piston head. I'm going to zoom up on that and take a good close. And when you zoom up, they're just full of JPEG artifacts. It's impossible to work with them. And, look, let's be honest. The reality is that behind the scenes at JPL, on their computers, they've got the real stuff. They've got the really good, high quality stuff that we know exists. In fact, that reminds me of a funny story. I was at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory or near there in Pasadena with Hoagland on a presentation that he did. And apparently during one of the breaks, a guy came up to him with Mars Pathfinder photographs. And they were according to Richard, about 100 times better than what was actually posted on the web. And he was looking at them going, wow, this is astonishing. I mean, that looks fantastic. And the JPL scientist guy even said, yeah, we were wondering when you were going to spot this one. We had a pool going on when you were going to spot this one. And Richard was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. And the guy said, oh, wait a minute. I can't give these to you yet. I have to block out my employee number, because every photo that was taken out of there, every printed photo, had a stamp on the back of it with who checked it out. And so Richard said, okay, and he gave him back to the guy with a marker, assuming he was going to, blot it, and the guy was gone. The guy left. But Richard swears up and down that he saw it, and he saw the pictures, and he knows that the cameras on Pathfinder were, again, an order of magnitude better than the stuff that they've posted on the web. So the question is, what deep down in the files, how many amazing things are there for us to see from these rovers? I suspect quite a bit.
And if there wasn't anything there, then why would they care? And why wouldn't they make that material available?
Well, they don't want you to really see what's there. Again, they'll give it to you to a certain point, but they're not going to give you the smoking gun. They're not going to. They're not obligated. They're obligated to put the pictures of this stuff up on the web. They're not obligated to put good pictures of this stuff up on the web. There's nothing in the contract that says you have to put the highest resolution, highest quality versions of every single bit of your data on the internet for the public. There's nothing in the contract that says that. So they skirt around it that way.
But what I'm saying is that if there wasn't a smoking gun, then there would be no need for this playing around with the images other than, bandwidth. You put this huge file out there as an image. I mean, to download one thing, but just as an image on your page for you to right click on, it just kills your site. But
well, they're the government. They should have computers and servers that can handle that. I'm sure that's not the reason that they haven't put the high resolution. They put plenty of very high resolution stuff out there. The problem is it should all look better than it actually does.
Why? They're just using a Polaroid. No.
Yeah, well,
Okay, moving on. Earlier you were talking about these apparent cities that are like in the Sedona area. Not Sedona, Cydonia area.
Cydonia. Although it's interesting that Sedona looks like Mars and it's named Cydonia. It's also interesting that Cairo is the Arabic name for Mars, and it was founded apparently by an Anunnaki god named Marduk, who was the king of Mars, who ruled over the Anunnaki way station. So you have all these really interesting things that keep connecting. I like to go, that's really interesting. Well, that's really interesting. And you throw it all together and you actually have a pattern. So anyway, that was off topic.
Okay, that's okay. But we'll be coming back to that topic when you come back on for 2 hours next time.
Yes.
Anyway, so cities. What led you to believe that what you were seeing in the images wasn't a natural rock formation, but was actually some kind of a city or a man-made structure?
Well, for me, when I see 7 almost equally spaced parallel lines, which are clearly roads carved into the ground, and then you see block after block of what look like city block houses with, some of them with 2 stories, swimming pools, hotels, restaurants, processing plants, mining operations, trucks, what look like big support structures, tanks of some kind that have tubes running out of them. When you see all that stuff, and it's all together in one concentrated area, it's pretty easy for me to say to myself, oh, okay, this is not natural. This is clearly artificial, because nature doesn't make 7 straight parallel roads emerging from what looks like it used to be a waterway, like a lake or something, and leading into this beach, this really nice beachfront property. Plus, when I'm looking at something like the so-called Parrot City, what I found was that the NASA images of that, the ones that NASA had originally put out, there was an area that looked really, really dark, and it had some sort of straight lines on it. And those appeared to be like a dried up lake bed. But then there was a request made by a member of the public, and this gets into this whole Masonic, you got to ask the right question thing, that requested another shot of the parrot because they were interested in the parrot. And what they got was a shot of the city. But the difference between the original NASA versions of this area and the new picture that they took, even though it was with the same camera, was that this dark area you could see, and again, this is all in my Picasa web album. If you go to my mikebara.blogspot.com and click on photos and click on Picasa web album, it's all there in the pictures for Ancient Aliens on Mars 2. What you could see was that this dark area was actually white. It looked like concrete, and it was not flat and spread out, but it was vertical. And what they had done is they had taken the image of the city and they had stretched it out wide to make it look less unnatural, because what this white concrete stuff was with these straight lines, which were actually stiffening, they were like stiffening beads in the structure, it was about a 600-foot tall retaining wall. and nature just doesn't make 600-foot tall vertical retaining walls like it did around this city. So I looked at that and I went, well, that's artificial. So for me, it's pretty easy when I see stuff like that. I get, stunned by it, and my jaw drops on the ground, and then I say, I can't wait to start showing people these pictures.
Okay, another question from the chat room. Neutron, you're coming up with good ones tonight. Question, does Mike support the rumor that China's recent rover landing on the moon, which soon deliberately went black on its video feed, is now being used to pressure the USA to have the President Trans-Pacific Treaty talks go their way?
Well, it's a possibility. I didn't believe this crap when I first heard it, but then my brother's ex-wife actually works as an importer, and she sent us some images of what's going on right now. And the fact is, I didn't realize this because you don't hear about it on the news, but there's basically been a strike at all the docks where they're not nothing is coming into the West Coast. There's dozens and dozens of ships out there, off the coast that are ready to unload their stuff, and it's not being unloaded. And the rumor around town is that, the Chinese are creating pressure. So another way that they might be creating pressure to get this agreement, pushed through, is by saying, look at what we took a picture of. And if you don't agree to this, guess what we're going to do? We're going to show it to people. So to me, it's a possibility. I wouldn't 3 or 4 days ago, I would not have considered that as a possibility, but I do now because of what I just found out today, which is that there's something going on, and there's pressure being applied politically on the U.S. to do something. The question is, what is it that they're trying to get the U.S. to do? I'm not really clear about that, but it may have something to do with this Pan-Pacific Treaty.
But see, that's really interesting, and this is totally off topic. I have a friend who drives truck and picks up cargo in Chicago and then delivers it, and this stuff all comes right off the boat, and then they transport it to where he is, and then he takes it to a local because it comes by train. And he was saying that it was more of a Teamster labor issue going on, and that's why those boats were backing up, because they wouldn't offload them. So is it the government, our government saying, well, we're not going to take your stuff, China, ha, ha, ha? Or is China saying, well, we're just going to bring it by the port, but we're really not going to bring it into port?
Well, China owns a lot of these ports now. I believe they own the port of Long Beach. I think they own the port of Los Angeles. They've been buying up these things. So if they've bought up more of these than we actually realize, and they're controlling them, they could basically just be saying this is shut down. And of course, the Teamsters are always a great excuse for this. But, to me, as I look at it, there's some big geopolitical games going on right now. The question is, by who and for what reason, and what are they trying to pressure the U.S. into doing? And what is the U.S. holding back on? That's my question. What is it we're refusing to do? And I think that what was his name again? The guy in the chat room?
Neutron.
And a Neutron's question is one that I have a different answer to than I would have 2 or 3 days ago. Once I realized, wow, there's a bunch of stuff out there in the ocean just kind of sitting there waiting to be brought into port, and I'm beginning to wonder, can I go to the store and pick up some Twinkies on Thursday, or are they all going to be gone? I hope not.
I don't know. Are they made in China?
Well, no, but they have to be shipped in, so.
Anyway.
You can't buy them if they're not shipped in.
But if nothing's made in the United States, so obviously it has to be shipped in. So.
Yeah. Is anything made in the U.S. anymore? I mean,
we make garbage. We do that good.
Yeah. Well, there's reasons for that, which we won't get into because this is not a political show, is it, Rita?
Well, I try to stay out of that area, but every so often it just, pops up.
Well, they do overlap. I mean, come on. They do overlap.
They do. I mean, especially when you're talking about things that are not being revealed, like images from the moon, images from Mars, information about UFOs that have interacted on the planet, stuff that you hear that the Smithsonian picked up at some point in time and now it's gone.
Yeah.
It's not political, but it's political.
Well, again, I would recommend everybody who's a conspiracy theorist to any degree at all go see the film Jupiter Ascending, because in spite of the horrible reviews, which are completely unjustified, it's a very interesting movie, and it's trying to send you a message that everything that goes on ultimately is commercial. Everything that you see happening in public, there's some sort of commercial interest behind that, and it even basically says the universe operates on commercial capitalist principles. And the human race in the movie are a product that needs to be used, harvested by the aliens, or they're not really aliens, they're humans, to survive. And it's like, I think if you're into this stuff and you really want to understand where it all comes from, I would say go see the movie, because it's like the Wachowski brothers are trying to wake you up. They tried in The Matrix to tell you that a lot of what you see is fake, and that was a metaphor for the financial system. And this is like right in your face. This is the way things work, and you got to bring something to the table. So it's pretty interesting stuff. I just thought I would tell people that.
Jupiter Rising, huh?
Jupiter Ascending.
Ascending. I'm gonna have to.
And Jupiter is Mila Kunis, who is always nice to look at in the movie. Even though I think she might have Botoxed a little, over Botoxed her forehead, because one of her eyes is kind of drooping now. I hadn't noticed that before. So anyway.
Okay, now we're really, maybe you can like send out some good February Mojo vibes to her,
Yeah, let's just tell her to, because that can happen if you, not that I would know, but if you take a shot of Botox too close to your eye, your eyelid can droop because the muscles go dormant. So I don't know. I was just trying to figure that out. I'm like, wow, what's going on with her eye? Remember when Katie Holmes had the whole Bell's palsy thing in Batman, and nobody could figure out why she looked different? And you don't remember that, do you? Okay, all right. Well.
Okay, we're just moving along. Anyway, even though I did see all the Batman movies, but anyway. Okay, so we were talking about these cities. How many cities do you think there are? How many individual locations have you discovered?
Well, I've seen at least 3 or 4. I mean, there's the area of Cydonia. There's this Parrot City area, which is on the in the southern hemisphere. There's an area called the Inca City, which was first discovered in the 1960s in the Mariner probes, and was called a city. That's what the NASA guys nicknamed it. That looks an awful lot like buried ruins do on Earth. Buried ruins of in Iraq and Kazakhstan, and that's a place, an area that I cover in the Mars books that I think is of really great interest. And then there's another area in Hydaspes Chaos, which is a chaotic area that the Russians in 1989 came out and said, this is a city, this is a buried city. This looks exactly like LA would look from the sky in an infrared image, and made quite a big deal out of it. And then NASA went back and rephotographed it. And, you look at the photographs, and sure enough, it sure does look like a series of buried structures with very regular streets running at 90-degree angles through it, which is usually a giveaway that it's that you're looking at something artificial. Although it's not proof, it is an indication. So I've got 4 or 5 places that I can't wait to look at. Not to mention Phobos, the moon of Mars, which is really an asteroid that again has this sort of mesh grid pattern on it that it may itself be, formerly inhabited. So
and we're going to come to that, because I have a whole bunch of questions about that.
Okay.
A whole bunch.
Okay.
Yeah. I am like so extra prepared for you tonight, Mike. So extra prepared. So, okay, but now you totally made me lose my thought. Okay.
Well, that's why you have your questions written down, isn't it?
I know, but see that, there's the question, but then there's the follow-up question. And see, I need to not pay attention to the chat room because I didn't write my follow-up question down, and then we were talking about Botox, and that really threw me off. With the number of cities that you have identified, and I'm going to make the assumption that there are probably more.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make that general assumption. About how many people would you guesstimate, would either live in one of these cities, or could you give it a comparison size, like it would be parallel to the number of people that live in Washington, D.C., or live in Podunkville, USA? I mean, what are we talking about size-wise?
That's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about that, but in terms of the one area, let's say that's near Hydaspes chaos on Mars, that first the Russians and then later the U.S. Photographed. I mean, that was about the same size as the Los Angeles basin, which has a population of around 9 million people, 9 to 10 million people. So an awful lot. Now, if you look at the Sumerian records that talk about the Ajiji, who were the ones that lived on Mars, they never had anybody that big, but a party that big. But there could have been previous human inhabitations. It's just I don't know. I don't know where these guys come from. But we're talking, a lot of people. Now, in the other area, for instance, Parrot City, I would say thousands. I would say that there would be enough. It would be about the same size as, let's say, Hermosa Beach. I don't know how many people live in Hermosa Beach, but I'm guessing 10, 15, 20,000. So, at the most. So that's not as big an area, but it does have some very nice lakefront property there in Parrot City. There's some really nice looking stuff that right above the retaining wall. It looks like it would have a great view. So. Sorry.
So now you're looking at, I can sell it to you cheap.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's got any claims on it, unless, the Abrasic family from Jupiter Ascending has claims on it. It's possible it's theirs.
Oh, I'm sure that, the governments have already divvied it up and haven't told us yet.
Probably. You're trespassing on the property of, Oman or something.
One of the things that I was reading about in the book, and I think this is in the... Did you
ever get a copy of the book, by the way? I'm sorry. Did that ever come? I mean, I've been...
Finally.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh, it has just been a very weird period, I think, on the planet for everyone. So... Yeah. I just kind of go with it, and it's like, okay, if you can get that to me now...
We just went through a Mercury retrograde, and for people that poo-poo astrology and Mercury retrograde, I mean, give me a break. There were so many things that went wrong mechanically and in terms of shipping and things that just there's so many things that happened with computers and stuff during that period. It was one of the worst that I've ever experienced, and it's like, I'm sorry, but I've been through enough of these that I can honestly say that they're a real thing. I mean, anytime Mercury goes retrograde, just don't plan on anything going the way you expect it to go.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the book. And yes, I did get a copy, which is why I'm actually prepared. One of the things you talk about, and which, I was kind of going through it, and I flipped the page, and it just totally caught my eye, was this skull-shaped structure that I think was in Cydonia area.
Yeah, it's not in Cydonia. It's near where one of the I think Spirit or Opportunity rovers took that picture. But yeah, that's cool. What do you want to talk about?
I don't know. It's
that
cool.
One is cool. It is incredibly scary. There are areas. As the rovers were covering Mars, it took pictures of things that looked like dinosaur skulls. They're very, very similar to dinosaur fossils from Earth. They're kind of grouped together. And then Joseph Skipper, I believe, is the guy who discovered this. He came across this object that is quite clearly not a rock, for those of you who don't know. And again, this is on my my Picasso Web album and the Ancient Aliens on Mars 2 pictures. And from a distance, it looks like there's a little mound there, like maybe the body's partially buried, but this is the skull. And it looks like a human skull to a certain extent, but there's these massive jowls on the left and right side, kind of tubular jowls, almost like a stormtrooper's helmet from Star Wars or something. And when you zoom up close on it, it has 2 eye sockets. It has bone in between the eye sockets. It has what appears to be a nose with a couple of nostrils, these heavy jowls, and then there's these deep indentations on the skull, which if this head was really a massive bony head and had to be supported by a humanoid-sized body, and this is the size of a human skull, it would need really deep-set bone structures in order for the tendons and the muscles to attach properly to the skull in order for it to move. And when you look at it, that's exactly what it has, is these really, really deep indentations. And, they've never gotten another picture of this thing. Spirit or Opportunity, whoever took the image, I think it was Spirit, I want to say, has long since moved on, and we've never seen any other pictures of it. Although I suspect the guys at NASA have some really good and probably really scary pictures of it. All I can say is this is not a dude you would want to meet in a dark alley some night. This is what his head looked like. He was one scary guy.
Well, and there's one series of photos that you have that when you look at it, almost looks like one of the elongated skulls that you find out of South America.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if on that particular. Are we talking about the same one? I don't know.
On page 110.
Yeah, I don't have the book in front of me.
Okay, it says nearly symmetrical mesa with nearby ruin, tetrahedral pyramid.
Oh, that's
southwest of the face on Mars.
That's what NASA used to call the skull-shaped mesa, which is a mesa nearby. It is a mesa that may have some natural formation, but if you draw a line through it through the so-called skull area, it does look kind of like a human skull, kind of like an elongated skull, but it's a very large land formation near the face on Mars. But it's the thing about that is that if you draw the line through it vertically instead of horizontally, for symmetry, you can see that it's eroded symmetrically. And things that erode symmetrically used to be symmetrical, and nature does not make symmetry except in really rare circumstances, especially on that scale. So what I think is that is something that's probably an eroded artificial structure of some kind made by whoever made the face on Mars and the rest of that stuff there.
So this one is actually by Cydonia.
Cydonia, yeah. Very near it.
But see, I think that's really interesting because that's yet another face-like artifact.
Oh, but
that's Skeletor.
That's just what they call pareidolia. You're just seeing faces. It's not like they're really there.
I don't know. I flipped the page and I'm like, wait, there's a skeleton. And then I read the text. It was...
Yeah, I was being sarcastic. It's not all in your head. There's all kinds of these facial structures all over the Martian surface, and of varying sizes and scales. But there's also apparently some real skulls, which is the one I talked about earlier.
Okay.
So,
and so the real skull that you were talking about, how big is it? I mean, is it giant skull or is it
human? It's the size of a human. It's about the size of a human head from the distance and scale of the camera. Yeah, it's maybe a little bigger. But a guy who's 7 or 8 feet tall. I mean, we're talking Shaq size. I mean, look, to you and me, Shaquille O'Neal's a giant, right? I mean, he's a big dude. That doesn't mean that he's necessarily.
He doesn't seem like he's very nice either.
No, he doesn't. I hear he sweats a lot too, from what I hear. So, Maureen Ellsbury told me that. Anyway. No, I didn't mean it that way. Sorry. That's a long. Just to not go there.
Yeah, let's just not go there, because I just don't want them going, "Hey, this is what he said." See, now I'm like looking for that other head, but I think I've seen the picture.
Yeah, for the record, I did not say that Maureen slept with Shaq. Okay, I'm not saying that. Just for the record.
And her last name is no. And what's her email? Yeah. What's her email address?
Some people know who she is. She was on Uncovering Aliens with me. She was my co-star on Uncovering Aliens. So
I know, but you didn't invite me on the show. So
well, we didn't get enough episodes. We wanted more, but they were just not a very. I don't know. As a network, they just kind of. I don't know. They didn't. The guys who were supporting the show left the network, and it's just one of those stories. One of those Hollywood stories where you end up disappointed. Something could have been great. Kind of like Star Trek, it got stopped before its time. It should have kept going for several more years, and it did.
But just think, it's been in reruns for 40 years.
Well, so have we. I mean, we just on Valentine's Day, they had 8 hours of Uncovering Aliens. They repeated the 4 episodes over and over and over again. There's actually enough there to cut like 6 episodes. They only ever cut 4, but they repeated them in a big marathon on Valentine's Day. And I'm like, I don't know if I should be flattered or not. They did put us in prime time, but maybe they put us in prime time, in a week where a weekend on
where they figured nobody'd be there.
Figured nobody'd be watching, but I don't know. I don't know what the ratings were for that particular showing, but it was kind of flattering. They're still showing it.
But that is good, and I don't think it's hit Netflix. So
no, but we should hope that it does, because it would be cool if it was on Netflix.
then I'll actually watch it. You keep talking about these pictures that are in your book and the pictures that are on your web page, mikebara.blogspot.com.
Go to the photos and click on
How
photos.
recent are they? Like
Well, a lot
the
of these
more
images-
recent one, how recent are they?
Well, some of them were just taken, a few months ago by when the book was being put together. So some of them are very new. I mean, there's pictures of artifacts of things on the surface that were taken by the Curiosity rover back just after it arrived a couple years ago. So we're talking about stuff that's been up only fairly recently. That when it landed, there was this big pyramidal object in the distance that when you enhance it, it looks exactly like the bent pyramid in Saqqara, Egypt. And for some reason, they just never got another clear picture of that. The entire time they've been roving around Gale Crater on Mars, they've never gotten another really good picture of that sucker. I don't know why.
Well, and I'm asking because some of the pictures that are in the book, because I haven't been to your webpage in a while, are remarkably clear, or they appear remarkably clear.
Yeah.
Compared to some of the other ones that are like, huh?
Well, that's a lot of cleaning up on my part. Also, you have to remember that when you're looking at the images in the book, you're losing resolution by a significant factor, because it's really hard to translate what you see on a computer screen to the print medium. The print medium is just not the best for that. And what happened is that from the Moon book to the Mars books, I got a lot better at you working with the images to get them to show up good in print, to show up something close to what they look like on my computer screen. And that's really actually one of the most frustrating things about doing lectures and presentations, is that you're always using different computer equipment with different video outputs, with different projectors, and the images on the projectors never look as good as I can see them on my computer screen. That's really, really frustrating. But that's just the way it goes. I'm looking at a picture right now of a cowbell on Mars. So that's interesting. Dishes, turbochargers, all kinds of stuff. Captain Kirk's phaser that he dropped.
Or what we think are those things.
Well,
we don't know exactly.
No, there's something similar to that. There's one image though that somebody found. It looks like a piston head, and it's just so obviously mechanical. I just I can't even. I can't say enough about how mechanical it is. So, as you know, my engineering background, I'm just like, yeah, that's a piston head.
For something. Why do you think that they were just as bad as us and they just littered everywhere? Or do you think something happened that dispersed all of this material?
Yeah, some bad stuff happened. And again, to go back to some of the interpretations of some of the tablets that Sitchin did, that what he says happened essentially was around 12,800 years ago, that Nibiru made an unusually close approach to the inner solar system. It got, close enough to the asteroid belt that it kind of pelted the Earth with and Mars with meteors. And I think Mars took a couple of really big hits. And, some of them may have been fairly direct hits on some of their structures and really threw them a new one and really messed them up and damaged a lot of this equipment. So it's not that they're necessarily litter bugs. It's just that they've kind of got, they got hit pretty hard by something that really messed up the Earth and also messed up Mars during that period.
Okay, so we're going to turn our attention here and talk about Phobos. Is that how you say it?
You do pronounce it Phobos, yes.
Which is a satellite or a moon of Mars, correct?
It's called a moon of Mars. It's really, if you look at it, it appears to just be an asteroid that's in orbit right around the equator, which is really interesting. So, yeah.
Okay, so what makes it so special, so mysterious?
What makes it interesting and mysterious is that, excuse me. What makes it interesting and mysterious is that, when the Russians first got close to it in 1989 and took images and then took spectral measurements of it, what they found was that it was too light given its composition. And what they discovered, or what they suspected, was that there were these very large hollow voids inside of Phobos. And when we went back and revisited it and took more pictures of it and took more measurements, we discovered that, yeah, there's like, you know, rooms inside of this thing, 200 by 200 feet, which is basically the size of a ballroom at a hotel. I mean, it's a pretty good sized room in terms of square footage. There was a whole bunch of these cavernous areas inside of it. And then when you look at the outside of it, you have this mesh pattern, this cross hatching on it, which a lot of it is below the dust and debris at the surface. And so it looks like something that may have been at one time an artificial construct that has now, you know, that had interiors that has now been emptied out or abandoned and is floating around in orbit around around the equator of Mars. So there's a lot of things about it that make it kind of unusual. And if you believe in the accretion model of the solar system, which is that, you know, objects, big clumps of rocks smacked together, and instead of destroying each other, they magically glued themselves together, there shouldn't be any of these voids. So, you know, the logical solution, the logical conclusion is that what you're really looking at is something that has been hollowed out to some extent. And then you look at the outside with the mesh pattern and the cross-hatching, and you're like, that really doesn't look very natural either. So there's a lot of argument and some support for the argument that it may be an artificial satellite.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of throw a left ball question at you, but I know what answer I want to hear, so I just am going to ask the question. Do you happen to know if they have identified how many of these chambers are internal to that structure? I
do not know the exact number. No, I don't know that.
Rats.
So, sorry. I didn't give you the answer you wanted, I'm sure of that.
No.
Why?
Okay, but if you ever find out and you hear that there are 8 caverns in there, you have to remember and call me or email me or something, because I have a very specific reason for that number. But I'll just save that. But 8, the magic number. Anyway, okay, so you're suggesting that they think it's artificial. Do you think that it could have been this structure could have been at one time perhaps a craft?
Yeah, it could have been something that was used to transport people or material to the planet Mars for some reason. It could have been like an orbital station. I mean, there are references in various Sumerian tablets to there being space stations, orbital stations, that kind of thing around both the Earth, the Moon, and Mars. And it could very well be that. But, you know, the question is, again, we won't know until we actually land there and go look. Now, one of the things about Phobos that's really fascinating is the presence of this thing called the monolith on Phobos. And one of the guys who's made a really big deal out of that is Buzz Aldrin, the astronaut, the Apollo 11 astronaut. And back in 2009, he was doing an interview on C-SPAN, and he said, you know, there's a monolith on Phobos. It looks just like the monolith from 2001. And, you know, lo and behold, they turned Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter around when it got close enough to Phobos, and it took a picture of this object that was casting this long shadow on the surface of Phobos, and it looked exactly like the monolith from 2001, except that it's white instead of black. It's a bright color, but it's sticking up out of the surface, just like I mean, you really look at the picture and you expect to see a bunch of apes around it, like, you know, rubbing their fingers along the edges of it or something, because it's really incredible. It has the same proportions. It appears to be about the same height. And there's even a Canadian mission that supposedly is going to be sent to Phobos to land on it and send a rover out to the monolith and take a look at it. And unfortunately, they haven't gotten any final funding for that. So it doesn't appear that it's actually really been funded, or that it's it's going to happen. And until they get money, it's not going to happen. But, you know, it could be the Americans kind of said, you know, you really don't want to do that. We really don't want you landing on Phobos. It's really not a good idea. For precisely
well,
that
you know,
reason.
but if they go, then the monolith will take off, because that's what it did in the movie. I mean, I just think that it's amazing that there is a structure like that. But often, when we have these writers of science fiction many times their constructs, the constructs of their imagination, end up becoming true.
Well, yeah,
which I find interesting.
And then you have to ask yourself, did they know something? Were they told something? Did they put something in their science fiction story that, in fact, somebody already knew? That's the next question, which brings me to, that's why I'm interested in secret societies and their involvement with NASA at this point.
So you were saying that the Russians were taking pictures of Phobos?
They did way back in 1989, and there's a really famous case where this probe Phobos 2 took pictures of Phobos, and then it ceased operating. And right before it ceased operating, there was this long bar-shaped object that appeared to be approaching the Phobos 2 probe. Now, confused by Phobos and the Russian probe Phobos 2. It was called Phobos 2. And for years and years and years, there's been a big controversy that this was this was some sort of UFO that attacked the Phobos 2 probe because it was getting too close to Phobos. But what I argue in the book and what I found is that I've actually got copies of all the images that Phobos 2 took of the moon Phobos. And this is the so-called UFO is actually just a camera anomaly that appears in a bunch of different images in the same place, the same time. There's no detail. It's just like a white bar, and it's really just a transmission error in the data. It's not really a UFO. So that was one of the things that I was able to put to rest in terms of rumors that have been floating around the UFO community for years.
But why would Russian scientists take pictures of this nondescript, weird asteroid that was surrounding Mars?
Well, I mean, scientific curiosity, it's always been part of it. It's like, that's why we send probes anywhere, is we're always trying to, discover things for the first time and be the first to come out with it. And I think the Russians were just as interested in that kind of stuff as we were. So, I mean, why would they do that? Because it's a place to go and take a look. Why do we go to Titan? Why do we go to any of these places and take pictures or make observations? It's because we want to learn. And, I don't have a real problem with that. There's nothing suspicious about the Russians wanting to go investigate Phobos at all.
Okay. But they are planning to send another exploration there, or are they thinking about sending a rover there?
Right now, there's a proposal that I've heard of, a proposal from the Canadians to build and send a probe to Phobos and land on it near the monolith and go right up to it and find out what it is. And that's the last I've heard of it, was the proposal. It doesn't seem like anybody's been given any money, even though it wouldn't really be very expensive to do that. So, the Canadians want to make a little way in space. They make some headlines in space. I think it'd be a great way to do it, is let's go investigate the monolith and find out what it is. It doesn't look like just a rock. It looks like something really, really interesting. And that's probably why the Canadians are being discouraged from actually doing that.
But it would be so cool.
Yeah, there's lots of things that would be cool, but that doesn't mean they're going to get done, right?
I find it very interesting with all of this quote-unquote scientific interest in Mars, that in mainstream news and mainstream television, you rarely see anything about what's coming from Mars.
Yeah, it's not like on the nightly news that there's a regular report of, and today, the Curiosity rover photographed this area of the surface of Mars near Gale Crater. It doesn't do anything. It's weird, because it used to be, when we had probes around planets and stuff, you used to see that stuff on the nightly news all the time. And now it's like they send them up, and only the space geeks who are willing to go to the internet are actually allowed to see any of this stuff or have any interest in seeing any of this stuff, because they just don't talk about it on the mainstream news anymore. I don't know the answer to that. It's like they're almost discouraging interest in space and space travel, it seems like.
I know that when they had I think it was Curiosity. Was that one of the probes that went to Mars?
Yeah, Curiosity.
They did some kind of, PBH, whatever special, talking about its adventures and whatever. And it was a little juvenile, but it was still really interesting. But it was on some off, like the Travel Channel or some weird network that, why didn't it at least get the History Channel? I don't know. I just found it really, and still find it very interesting, that we don't hear that we've sent another probe. It landed. I mean, even just those kind of updates, it's just almost like this secret space mission going on that we don't know anything about.
Yeah, and another thing about that too that's really intriguing is that there are no shows like that. Like even on the Science Channel, you would think they would have a daily or weekly science update talking about things like that, but they don't. They do show a lot of shows about aliens. They show a lot of shows talking about conventional physics and filling people's heads with ridiculous ideas like dark matter and we know this. I love it when Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye and all these other guys get up there and say we know this and we know that, and it's completely wrong. That's one of my. Really, the Science Channel is funnier to me than the Comedy Channel. Comedy Central is, but the reality is that there's no real show that does that talks about that stuff. And the only time you ever see anything is you see a few internet reports when there's a big plume on the surface of Mars, and that's about it. Other than that, there's no daily scientific reporting, and I think that's unfortunately a circumstance or a result of our current culture and civilization, where there just isn't a lot of interest in that kind of thing, and being smart is not really necessarily cool.
I don't know. I know a lot of smart people.
Well, I know, but you're not cool. You're not as cool as Beyonce and Jay-Z.
No, I'm not as rich as Beyonce and Jay-Z, but I wouldn't want to be them. I'd rather be me and rich. That'd work. But
yeah, I wouldn't want to be Beyonce. I've always wanted to be a man. I'm not, speaking of the Wachowski brothers. I don't want to be a woman. So. No.
Let's not go there. Talking about your dating life now. It's like
I'm available, ladies. This is a hot month for me. I'm very hot right now.
So, ladies, if you're listening, go on his website, send him an email, Facebook him.
Yeah, I'll be.
He's got a week and a half. Not quite.
Yeah, I'm going to be moving to LA soon. So if you're in the LA area, ladies, look me up.
Oh, God. This is going to be changed into Matchmaker Central.
Well,
join Dr. Rita on Matchmaker Central.
It's a 2-hour show with only one break. There's plenty of time for that. Let's face it. This is more like if this was coast to coast, this would be like a 4-hour interview. Come on.
Well, maybe I should go look in the chat room, see if anybody is like jumping on the request. Anybody? Anybody? Oh, Carol. No.
Not Carol.
Were you married to a Carol?
No. I was married to a Judy, but that's the I just was thinking, it is Carol, but it's not Carol. Okay, all right.
Okay, moving on. Anything else? What else have you found up there? I mean, we have like 10 minutes left. What else have you discovered up there that we haven't really talked about?
Well, I think that the fact that there's life there. One of the things in Ancient Aliens on Mars that I also cover in Ancient Aliens on Mars 2 is the fact that, when the Viking probes landed in 1976 and did soil samples, they had a test called the labeled release experiment, which basically took Martian soil, put it into a little cooker, dropped some nutrients in it, and waited to see if bacteria reacted and consumed the nutrients. And they did. And so the conclusion from that is that there's microbial life on Mars. NASA then immediately said, no, it was just a chemical reaction, and that there were 3 other tests for life, which they also did at that time, and they all came back negative. But we didn't find out until 2006 that in all likelihood, the other 3 tests were not sensitive enough to have detected microbial life. The only one that was sensitive enough was the so-called labeled release experiment created by Dr. Gil Levin, who and the one that was sensitive enough came back and said there's all kinds of microbial life on Mars. And then on Ancient Aliens on Mars 1, I showed pictures of rocks near the Pathfinder landing site that changed color over the seasons. As it was colder in winter, the rocks would get very kind of brown and normal rock looking. And then as things heated up, they would become green. And then they would go back from green to brown as the seasons changed. And what that's an indication of is simple plant life, like lichens, like the moss you might see on a rock here in the United States or here on Earth, waxing and waning as the biosphere heats up and cools down and heats up and cools down. So you've got actual plant life there, much more sophisticated than simple bacteria. You've got visual evidence of that, which I think is really important. And then Robert Morningstar, I put a couple of his pictures that he found from Curiosity, Spirit, and Opportunity that show, rocks that have this fuzzy moss all over them. They're very green when you do the color enhancement, when you correct the color and do the color enhancement. So I think what you've got there is a real clear pattern that there is actual primitive plant life already on the planet Mars. And that's something that's just never talked about and has been, I think, unfortunately, really suppressed over the last 30 or 40 years.
Well, and if Mars had an atmosphere and the atmosphere wasn't totally annihilated so that there's some level of atmosphere, I find it interesting that there haven't been any reports, or that we know about, of some small forms of animal life. I mean, not just bacterial, fungus, mold, whatever, but some small form of life that was able to survive the catastrophe and reproduce on that planet.
Well, I don't know about that. There's pictures that show, what people think are rats and different creatures, but they all look to me like they're fossilized and frozen. So I think whatever happened to Mars, they pretty much are gone. I don't think there's any really sophisticated life on Mars right now. If there is, it's probably all living underground. But the thing is that if you have plant life like that, if it flourishes on Mars, what did they teach us in school that plants do? Plants take in carbon dioxide and they give off oxygen. Right? And what we need to make the atmosphere thicker and have more density is oxygen. So it seems to me that what we should be doing, considering the atmosphere of Mars is 99% carbon dioxide, is sending a lot of plant life, simple lichens, just blast it up there in a rocket and blast it somewhere on the surface of Mars and let them just start taking in that carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. And if we do enough of it and send enough of them there, we could have a pretty nice place to live on Mars in a couple of 100 years. So to me, it's a long-term project, but it's one that we really ought to pursue because we can bring Mars back to life. And if we can thicken the atmosphere, then it can retain more heat. If it retains more heat, then the water will start to flow again. When the water starts to flow, more plants will come back to life. I think a lot of the dormant species and dormant flora and fauna that are there will come back to life. And we could have a really convenient, kind of a second home, Mars could become the beach house of the Earth, the vacation getaway.
For the one percenters.
Well,
but I actually think that that's what happened with our planet, that some group came here billions of years ago with their blue-green algae and terraformed it, took this carbon dioxide covered planet and helped it to produce an atmosphere. And I think it's interesting that you're suggesting that we go and terraform Mars.
Well, yeah, I think it's just something that we ought to be doing and we haven't done. And, I don't know why we're waiting. I mean, there some people are kind of wacko about it and saying, oh, well, we don't want to interfere with the Martian biosphere. It's like, what biosphere? The planet's basically dead. So let's, some life is better than no life. And I think it would be good for us if we had a second home. And you could certainly make Mars into that. And I just think it would be a grand project that the human race could devote itself to that really wouldn't be that expensive. I mean, we could shoot rockets off on a fairly regular basis to Mars and reseed it. And we could certainly genetically engineer. I mean, look, if we can genetically engineer a tomato, we can genetically engineer plants that are really super efficient at at reproducing and sucking up the carbon dioxide and replacing it with oxygen. And, we could turn it into a really temperate, nice, attractive, fun place to go in a relatively short amount of time. And I think it would be a great project for us to commit ourselves to as a species.
And then you could say you're a Martian.
Yeah, well, because people could go there. And they wouldn't have to die on Mars like the Mars One program.
Okay, so I'm going off topic because there were a bunch of questions in the chat room that I didn't pay attention to, so I'm going to pay attention to them now.
Oh, well, and that's bad of you to do that.
Well,
we should answer the questions. Give the people what they want.
Then I pay attention to the chat room, and then I don't pay attention to you, and then it's a catch-22.
Give the people what they want, Rita.
Oh, I'm working it. But they want you, Mike. This is from Cruzy, and the question is, do the pyramids on the moon correlate with any of the pyramids on Earth or Mars?
There's one pyramidal object that I'm really aware of on the moon. That's the so-called daedalus ziggurat, which is a thing I got into a big argument with a NASA-funded guy a couple years ago. Do they correlate? Yeah, they look like the same architecture. That's the thing. That's why I think whoever was on Mars was probably human or humanoid or related to us in some way, like Sitchin's Anunnaki, because when you look at the architecture, it looks like something human beings would build. I mean, the scale on Mars is vastly different. There's an enormous four-sided pyramid, which is a dead ringer for some of the pyramids in China, and I even do an overlay comparison. The difference is just scale. So it looks to me like human architecture, like they think with the same aesthetic in terms of design and engineering and things that we do. And so I think there is a connection, and the connection is in the details of how these things were constructed. Unfortunately, we're not going to really know all those details until we actually go to some of these places and land and really take a good look at them.
Great. There has been a lot of talk about private industry sending people into space, into orbit, possibly to the moon, possibly to Mars. How do you think that's going? And do you think that it's going to be more activity coming out of the public sector, breaking through these doors into space versus the government?
I think it's going okay, and no, is the answer. We are developing some commercial space interests. It's not going all that well. I mean, Richard Branson lost a couple pilots, or at least one, a few months ago. SpaceX has had some stuff blow up in the pad. It's not that easy. It is rocket science after all. It's not that easy to put these objects into orbit. I think it's going to be a long time before the commercial development is sufficient, but I think the commercial concerns are what's going to drive the future. We're just making really, really poor progress at privatizing this stuff, which is where the progress can really be made. I mean, but that's an even bigger question, which is really bizarre, because if you look at the acceleration of transportation technology, what you see is a curve that basically is like a straight upward curve. It starts out with human being walking, then you have beasts of burden, riding a horse. You go from 22 miles an hour to like 24, 25, 30. You have the steam trains that can go 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, the automobile, the airplane, which can go 400 miles an hour, then the supersonic jet airplanes that can go a little over Mach 1, Mach 2, Mach 3, Mach 4. Then you have rockets. When we developed rockets in 1960, since we developed the rocket, we haven't developed any technology that can go any faster than the chemical rocket. So the curve goes straight up from about 1800 to about 1960, and then it just goes to a straight flat line. Now, do you actually believe that there's been no breakthroughs in transportation technology since the 1950s? I don't. I think that there is much more advanced technology, that we can travel much faster than we are right now with chemical rockets, and that this has all been taken dark by the government. So the government is going to support space exploration as long as it remains in its current primitive state, where it has been stuck now for 55 years.
And on that note,
so I'm
Mike,
pessimistic.
we need to say goodbye.
Okay.
I'm sure the music is rolling, but thank you for coming on. I look forward to your new book.
Yes.
Secret Societies. Yeah.
Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies. We'll be talking about that the next time I'm on.
Okay. Sounds perfect to me.
All right. Thank you for having me.
And so your book, Amazon, local bookstore, everywhere that they...
Yeah, local bookstore. I was just in a Barnes & Noble here in the Seattle area on Saturday that had a copy of Ancient Aliens on Mars 2. So run out there to the Federal Way store and pick it up because it's just sitting there waiting for you.
Mike signed it while he was in the store.
I did. I signed a bunch. Every time I find a book in a store, I sign it. So
cool.
Yeah, they're available that way through Amazon.com. Also available on Kindle. There's no audio version yet because we can't really find a voice actor to do it, and I don't want to do it. So, that's where we're at. But things are,
they're telling me I gotta go.
Okay.
They're telling me I gotta go. Okay, thanks, Mike. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Rita.
All right, that's Mike Bara. His book is Ancient Aliens on Mars 2. His webpage is mikebara.blogspot.com. And until next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.